An overview of Alberta's native plant toolkit, presented by Laurie Hamilton for the ANPC Back to Basics webinar series. Presented via webinar on January 18, 2023. I hope to provide everyone with a brief overview of different types of plant investigations and different types of tools. This presentation mainly identifies types of tools that can be used for developing study design, conducting a desktop assessment, collecting field data, and revegetation planning. This is not a comprehensive list, and it doesn't include the myriad of journal articles and internet tools available. Plant investigations have become more sophisticated over time, and the tools more accessible to a broader audience. That being said, there are a lot of tools out there now, so it can be overwhelming if you are just getting started. This presentation does not assess the limitations or benefits of choosing any specific tool, as tool selection is very specific to the objective of the investigation and what plants or ecosystems exist at a location. Philosophically, in my mind, there are two main types of plant investigations. One is for personal curiosity, enjoyment, and use, and the other for conservation and management of native plants and ecosystems. In some ways, I consider this the social or public use of native plants and ecosystems, or in terms of an impact assessment, the social and economic factors. There are many different objectives associated with conservation and management of native plants, and I usually discuss or think about them in terms of pre-disturbance, during disturbance, post-disturbance, and monitoring investigations. You can see a few examples on the slide. In order to select the right tool, you will first need to clearly define your investigation objective. What question or questions are you trying to answer? In some cases, these may be regulatory-based objectives, or in other cases, you may be creating your own objectives for monitoring or research projects. If you are working on an impact assessment, you will need to know who owns the land, clearly define what activities will occur, and what native plant ecosystem conditions exist. For example, if on public lands there are obligations for conducting rare plant surveys following the ANPC Rare Plant Survey Guidelines. Within the survey guidelines, there are links to a suite of required tools to help when conducting a rare plant survey. These guidelines are available at the top of ANPC's homepage. Please note that I have compiled a list of resources, again, not comprehensive. And for many, I have included a link, but links change all the time. And recently, Alberta Environment and Parks changed their name to Environment and Protected Areas, so all AEP links may be old in very short order. When selecting a plant management tool, you will also need to know if there are specific tools that are required based on the type of land cover or activity at a location of interest. For example, if there is a semi-permanent wetland, there may be additional provincial requirements and tools to use, such as those associated with the Wetland Policy under the Water Act and those associated with the Public Lands Act. If you are assessing impacts to valued native plant components, then you need to find tools that help you describe existing conditions, project interactions with native plants, and residual impacts. These may be spatial analysis tools, which are not really covered in this presentation. For native plant conservation and management applications, there are 3 levels of investigations. 1. Landscape level, which includes patterns of plant structure and form. By that I mean forest, shrubland, grassland, bare, and water can be mapped at the landscape level, or structural stage such as old growth, mature forest, young forest, tall shrub, low shrub, etc. 2. Ecosystem level, where investigating valued native plant components includes spatial mapping and ground truthing plant communities, or more generally, land cover. It really depends on the scale of your research objective as to what classification system is used and how detailed the mapping inventory is. It is at this level where there may be specific regulatory tools that must be used, depending on the type of plant community that exists at a location and the proposed land use. For example, if a proponent or landowner plans to disturb a wetland, there are a suite of tools that must be used, such as Identification and Delineation Directive, Alberta Wetland Classification System, Native Plant and Pollinator Function Assessment, and others. And 3. Species level, where a single species or even individual plant, such as a whitebark pine tree, can trigger different regulatory requirements. For example, rare plant surveys are required in multiple directives and guidelines like the Conservation Grassland Assessment if there is the potential for listed rare plants to occur in the study area, So, when you are selecting your tools, you need to know the level of details required for your investigation, and generally, the larger the area, the coarser the investigation results. Or said another way, the less confidence you may have in the results that they truly reflect ground conditions. On the other hand, if the investigation question only needs coarse results, then confidence may be greater. So let's explore some of the different types of tools, and remember that this is in no way an exhaustive list. I have added as many tools as were readily available in my frontal lobe as I prepared this presentation. I consider plant investigation tools any document, application, reference, method, information, educational opportunity, best management practice, or regulatory guideline or standard that is relevant to your objective. In this presentation, I am focusing on geospatial tools and field tools, but I feel that the key for tool selection is a clear objective and how the study is designed. Geospatial tools allow you to essentially predict what you will find on the ground. These tools help you to describe plant habitat conditions and create maps, plant lists, and other tools for use in the field. This information is also helpful when figuring out what field gear to pack. Geospatial tools reflect more generalized information. There are many sources of spatial data, including several GOA departments which may house data specific to their mandate. The GOA also has an open data repository of freely available spatial datasets. Some other organizations, such as the Alberta Biodiversity Monitoring Institute, has collected plant species and ecosystem data throughout Alberta and has made that freely available through their data portal. Some municipalities have created open data too, such as the City of Calgary, which has a lot of useful datasets that you can access. Geospatial data includes environmental data, such as precipitation and temperature regimes, flowing and still water systems, surficial geology, terrain, and soils. In addition to spatial datasets that can be used to characterize potential plant habitat, other geospatial tools include imagery and vegetation inventories. There are two types of imagery that are easily accessible: aerial photos and satellite imagery. There are different sources for imagery. You can buy aerial photos through the Government of Alberta or through third-party companies. This includes drone imagery. ESRI's ArcGIS, which is the most commonly used mapping software for plant investigations, has free satellite imagery and historical images, for some locations, that can be accessed. But Google Maps, Google Earth, and other internet apps also allow you to view satellite images. There is a suite of land cover inventories that can be obtained. Some are free of charge, and some, mostly associated with the forested areas, are proprietary. These inventories include the Alberta Vegetation Inventory and Phase 3 forestry maps in the green area, Grassland Vegetation Inventory and Primary Land, and Vegetation Inventory, which cover the parkland and grassland areas, and the Derived Ecosite Phase Layer, which covers the ecotone between the white and green areas. The Alberta Merged Wetland Inventory, along with both the ABMI wetland and human footprint mapping, cover the entire province, except federal parks. These datasets can be downloaded and viewed and analyzed in a Geographic Information System, or GIS. If you don't have a GIS, then there are many different map viewers available to use, although not all datasets can be viewed through an online viewer. Some have to be downloaded to view. There are free GIS viewers and even a free GIS called QGIS, but you can also use Google Earth Pro, a free software, to view these datasets. Note that most interactive map viewers have a Legend Layers menu where you can change the layers and base map you are viewing. Many have different types of imagery that you can use as a base map, so you can view different snapshots in time to get a better idea of the conditions over time. If you are looking for tree information, there is tree information in GVI, PLVI, AVI, and Phase 3 Forest Inventory available through the Government of Alberta. The City of Calgary has a tree inventory where you can zoom to an area in Calgary and click on any dot to see what type of tree or asset it is. I am not sure if Edmonton has one too. Please let me know in the chat if they do. When interpreting spatial data, you will need to understand the classification system that was applied to create the data, as you may need to refine the mapping and classification in your area of study. There are many plant community classification schemes used in Alberta, such as the Grassland Vegetation Inventory, Ecosite Land Classification, Plant Community Classification, and Wetland Classification. Field tools include outputs from the geospatial tools, such as maps, datasheets, and species lists. In turn, the field data is used to confirm the geospatial predictions. Tools that can be used in the field often include ground truthing the mapping. Ground truthing involves documenting or photographing plant species and cover or detecting rare plant or weeds. Field data is then brought back into the geospatial environment to improve the mapped predictions. I like to point out that there are also limitations associated with field data collection, such as lack of access due to environmental conditions or land ownership. Visits reflect only 1 or 2 moments in time. When both geospatial tools and field tools are used together, the limitations of each type of tool is minimized. Pragmatically, the more clues you have to make your decision, the more confidence you have in the outcomes. When heading out to the field, an investigator often will take field maps and species lists created in the desktop assessment. Your backpack and truck will also be filled with data sheets, field guides, and other tools for plant identification, measurement, and documentation. In some cases, specimens will need to be collected. In that case, an investigator can check out ANPC's collection guidelines and have a plant press in tow. In the field, plant identification guides are important for most plant investigations, but the level of taxonomy may differ. For example, investigators conducting rare plant surveys should be intimately familiar with floras or treatments of species. 3 that I use often are Lorna Allen and Linda Kershaw's Vascular Flora of Alberta. In most locations where there is cellular service, I can access the online Flora of North America, which I believe is the main authority used in the new Flora of Alberta. The e-Flora of BC has excellent line drawings and often has treatments for species with multiple varieties. There's a lot of overlap in BC and Saskatchewan resources. There are other plant identification tools that can be used that may be specific to a region, such as ANPC's Whitehorse Wildland wildflowers, or specific to a group of plant of interest, such as ANPC's Rare Vascular Plants of Alberta 2nd edition, or the Invasive Plants of Alberta 4th edition Weed Guide. There are many more available for Alberta, such as some of the lone pine books, like Plants of the Western Boreal Forests, and the Common Rangeland Plants books. Both floras and guidebooks provide information on species habitat and ecology. There are also apps that can be used to provide a list and snaps of plants at a given location, like PlantWatch, which can be used as a basis and field checklist when creating a plant species inventory. You need to customize the query filter in NatureWatch to select only plants first and then export a list. The list includes information about the date of observation and the phenology of the plant. Another handy app is iNaturalist. This can be used as a geospatial tool in the desktop assessment, as well as a plant identification tool, as it has a lot of great photos. There are some plant identification applications that I have seen used, and they can be handy when you don't have diagnostic features like flowers, but I think these apps are still building their image library. Tools that can be used in the field often include ground truthing the mapping, which involves recording plant species and cover or identifying plant species of interest, such as rare plant or weeds. There is a lot of pre-field study design that is required, and there are quite Alberta-specific guidelines and other tools that you can use. For example, the Conservation Assessment in Native Grasslands, published in 2018 by the GOA, provides detailed methodology on the pre-field mapping requirements, as well as field data collection design. There are different types of rare plant survey guidelines, such as ANPC's Rare Vascular Plant Survey Guidelines, ABMI's Rare Plant Protocol, and the Government of Canada's Occupancy Survey Guidelines for prairie plant species at risk. When mapping weeds, it is important to document their presence and distribution in an area. I like to use either the Range Health Assessment Distribution Codes or the BC Weed Distribution Codes. Lastly, traditional plant surveys are specific to a region, so it is important to understand if there are regional methods that you would need to follow, and you might also have a list of potential traditional plants that could be in the area. There is a suite of websites that are what I call hotspots. These include the Alberta Native Plant Council's website. Here you will find a myriad of resources. Another great website is the GeoA's Rangeland Classification and Survey Tools website. Here, the GeoA provides a background on the ecosystem classification hierarchy, going from the regional to the ecosystem level. Note that for the grasslands, it identifies the range site, which is also called a site type in the Grassland Vegetation Inventory. The page outlines recent vegetation inventory datasets and provides a link to their dataset catalog. Finally, you can find links to all range plant community guides across Alberta at the bottom of the page. Taking a quick look at tools to help with reclamation and restoration projects include guidebooks, floras, online species databases, and many other tools can help when identifying plant habitats. This is important because when sourcing native plant propagules, you need to be able to substitute appropriate species into the revegetation plan or mix if a desired species is not available at the time of revegetation. Most greenhouses will have a list of species available, but you can also check out ANPC's native plant source list to get a list of Alberta native plant suppliers. When looking for restoration or reclamation materials, there are many websites that are useful, such as the Grassland Restoration Forum, which is an information hotspot for restoration, reclamation, and best management practices in the grassland. There are other tools for native plant measurement, such as the Reclamation Record of Observation Form, which has exacting specifications on data collection. These are required when conducting a detailed site assessment in preparation for a reclamation certificate. Again, I recommend checking out the ANPC website for more reclamation and restoration tools. Thank you for listening. Happy botanizing, mapping, or however you get joy from native plants.